And joining us now for some reactions to Mari's package about Trump's Board of Peace meeting yesterday, as well as his statements on Iran, is Kriti Upadhyaya. She's a foreign policy and defense analyst with the Heritage Foundation, as well as a visiting fellow there. Kriti, good morning. Thanks for joining us. Let's start with the topic of rebuilding Gaza. Obviously, the whole point of the Board of Peace meeting initially. There's still a lot of fighting on the ground, even though, there is a ceasefire. It's being violated pretty much every day. What will it take to get Hamas to disarm before they can start that 3-year rebuilding process?
Good morning, Carrie. Thanks for having me. Look, Gaza has been a very difficult topic. For 80 years, we've been trying to have peace in that region. And maybe President Trump's unconventional peace through strength approach is what we need right now, right? President Trump has a track record. He's ensured and mediated the Abraham Accords. He's released the hostages. And I know the ceasefire has been prickly, but it has also held on many times. So I think right now what we're looking at is a more unconventional approach, more pragmatic approach, where we're moving away from purely military arrangements to focusing on development and infrastructure. I think when you move away and you actually give people houses to live in, you give them infrastructure, you give them jobs, that incentivizes them to not see saviors and say Hamas or other terrorist groups. So, we've given a chance to the UN, to other organizations, to other countries for so long. I think it's time we give the Board of Peace a shot as well.
Kriti, you bring up a really important point in that this is a completely different approach to diplomacy, and I think nothing highlights that more than him including a sports figure, the head of FIFA, Gianni Infantino. And he is actually involved. It's not just, making a couple of speeches. He's directly involved with the plan to rebuild Gaza, as we saw at the Board of Peace yesterday. How does integrating soccer throughout all phases of the neighborhoods within Gaza, how does that help potentially de-radicalize a population, that's been taught in schools to basically hate their neighbor?
Yeah, like I said, President Trump is all about unconventional and pragmatic approaches. I think it's good. I think it gives an outlet for the youth, for the kids to really come together and really build a community, because that's what we're trying to do, right? Throughout this plan that President Trump has, you have various countries that have equities in the region, put in the money, put in the troops on the ground, have a police force, and really build a community through the redevelopment plan. That's why you have these whole plans for having high-story houses over there or other development work. So I think the focus through having FIFA or soccer really is to build a community, because that's what you really need, a community that can hold peace in Gaza.
Now, Kriti, I do want to move on to Iran. That's, of course, the other major element of the Middle East, rebuilding Gaza, one part, and de-radicalizing it. But also, Iran has been the sponsor of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis. So last time Trump gave Iran a 10-day warning, he actually hit them in about 48 hours with a midnight hammer. Do you see diplomacy or military action happening over, the foreseeable future? What's next?
Look, I think U.S. foreign policy right now in Middle East or globally everywhere is really defined by these dual levers of deterrence to ensure that we don't actually go to a full-scale war, and at the same time diplomacy. And that's what we're trying to do, be it the talks mediated by Oman earlier in this month in Oman, or the talks in Geneva, or right now President Trump giving 10 to 15 days to the Iranian regime to come to the table with a written proposal to show what they're going to do. And so I think the focus really is diplomacy. And the goal here is to reach a deal. Now, you played the clip as well. President Trump has always said the deal has to be meaningful. So what does that meaningful deal look like? Three things really, right? Firstly, Iran has to give up its nuclear arsenal, its nuclear ambitions, and that means enriching uranium at a level that's much less than 60%. Secondly, it has to cap its ballistic missiles. We're looking at a range that's less than 300 kilometers or so on. And finally, like you rightly said, it has to end these proxy wars that it's pursuing in the region. So the goal is really diplomacy and ensuring a deal through diplomacy. But as you know, Iran is not making that easy.
And Kriti, I want to, as we start to finish up, I want to understand in your view, if it's going to be the former, not the latter, if regime change is what's on the table. And Trump even said he thinks that's ultimately the best, but he's kind of playing both sides to some extent. If there was regime change, what would that mean, not only in terms of terrorism, but the remaining rogue regimes, which you would consider, with Venezuela, it seems defanged, and Cuba pretty much, not that powerful. It really just leaves Russia, China, and North Korea at that point. What would the fall of the Iranian regime mean?
Well, you have protests happening in Iran, so the people are not necessarily very happy with the regime. So regime change would definitely be something that the U.S. would welcome. But at the same time, the U.S. doesn't want to stretch itself because, our focus is back home domestically as well as within this hemisphere. So again, the goal is to have peace, to have diplomacy work, to get to a deal. But if military strikes is what it takes to get to a deal, then military strikes it is. And that's why you see this buildup, which right now is almost one of the biggest buildups we've seen since Iraq. And if regime change is what it takes to get to a deal, then, a regime change it is. But again, U.S. is not necessarily looking for a regime change, or that is not the goal. The goal, again, is to have a meaningful deal, and hopefully diplomacy works and it doesn't come to a military strike. But if it does, then you see that the U.S. is ready to do that. And at the same time, the military buildup not only shows that the U.S. is ready to strike, if that's what it comes to, it also gives important leverage during these talks and this time that President Trump has given to the regime. And it also builds confidence in our allies, and also gives this sense of uncertainty for the Iranian leaders.
Well, we appreciate your analysis this morning. Obviously watching with great interest. If the last time is anything as a bellwether, maybe he's not going to give him 10, 15 days. One doesn't know. Kriti Upadhyaya, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks.